Greetings, I'm Mary Curtis Ratcliffe from the Bay Area Women's Artists Legacy Project, and I will be interviewing Kim Thoman, one of our members. Kim, please introduce yourself, your name, the date, and where are you speaking from?
Sure. I'm Kim Thoman, and I'm in El Cerrito, California, and it is January 7, 2021.
Thank you. Kim, where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in Lincoln, Nebraska, through my junior year of high school. Then between my junior year and my senior year, I moved out to Palo Alto, California, um, uh, and stayed there until I went away to college at Davis, UC Davis.
All right. And did you make art when you were a child?
I did, and my mother nurtured the artwork that I did. I would draw these objects that I called moonflowers. And the interesting part about them for me, as I look back on them, is that they always had to have a function. Although I liked the way they looked as well, there was it wasn't they had to have something that they did, ostensibly on the moon, whatever it was. But in a child's mind, I thought, they were gonna, I don't know, wash the dishes or do some task that I probably was asked to do. But anyway, the idea that it was both a flower that I liked looking at, but it had a specific function, is most important to me in my mind.
Right. And was your art nurtured by your parents?
My mother was a research psychologist, and she found my thinking or something about me interesting. And I have a sister who was very early on, was capable of drawing very realistically. As I've taught for many, many years now. So I know that there's some students tell me that they knew how to draw in perspective, without being taught much at all, and most of us not. But I had a sister who did. And so one would have thought that there would be one artist in the family, that people would have identified her as the artist, and that would have been it. But because of my mother's background, I believe, in her just who she was, she found something about me, and I think the way I thought, very interesting and very curious. And my moonflowers and anything else that abstract drawings that I created were always given a great deal of encouragement. And so I actually grew thinking that I was like my mother, very much like my mother, and doing science, except that my science was a different medium. She was working with lab animals, and I was working with chalk and art medium. So yes, my mother was very supportive, very supportive.
That's great. Wonderful. So, and then where did you go to college, and did you major in art?
I did. I was advised by, I was had come from Lincoln, Nebraska, and I was in Palo Alto, California. And I had a counselor who advised me to go to UC Davis. I had been accepted into the UC system. I, however, wanted to go to Berkeley. But I was counseled and told, no, you're this, I think they thought I was very shy, which I think I was. And anyway, I was strongly encouraged to go to UC Davis. So that was in 1966, 67, 68, which is a very interesting time at UC Davis. and I was interested in ceramics at the time. And this UC Davis had a very interesting ceramics department, and I loved it. I was there in the pot shop, they called it, every day, and weekend nights. That's where I was. One of my most important instructors was Clayton Bailey. He was very interesting guy. And of course, Roy DeForest was there, Robert Arneson was there. I didn't have courses from Robert Arneson, but I did have courses from several artists who were young, very young artists who came as guest artists. Ann Stockton and Chris Unterseyer are two that I recall being involved with. But after 2 years, I still had that drive and desire, I can't tell you exactly why, to go to the big school, UC Berkeley. And so I transferred. And I transferred to UC Berkeley. An interesting time, because that very year that I transferred, the ceramics department had been taken out of the art department and been put in the environmental design department.
Wow.
So if I wanted to graduate in art, I had to start taking drawing and painting classes. I could not continue. It would have, I had all the 3D classes that I was, needed to graduate. So it only happened for 1 year or 2 years, because as soon as I graduated, they put it back into the art department, the ceramics department. So I did then start doing drawing and painting a great deal, taking a great deal of courses in drawing and painting, and I graduated in art as an undergraduate. After that, I went on to UC Riverside and got a teaching credential. I didn't, at the time, I was not as serious about my artwork. And I had to have a job. I knew I had to do something, and my family, everybody was teachers. So I went to UC Riverside, got a teaching credential, standard elementary school teaching credential, allowed me to teach K-12, and got that degree, and then came back up into the Bay Area and started to teaching in mostly junior high classes. But it wasn't enough for me. I knew I wanted to do something more, and I began to make some ceramic work again. And I would race home from school and go out into a back shed that I had, and I was doing ceramic flowers. Here we were again, making ceramic objects. And I made these ceramic objects. I made enough of them then, and applied for graduate school, San Francisco State University, and applied and was off to graduate school after, I think I taught the elementary school for about 5 years. And then I went off.
What was graduate school like for you?
Well, graduate school was interesting. The first thing that happened was one of my major professors had taken a vow of silence for a year. So that was very interesting. But they didn't fire him. The school didn't fire him. They indulged him, and he was silent for a year. That's what we dealt with. But basically, graduate school was fantastic for me. I felt as if I was back in the pot shop at UC Davis and in my element. I just loved it. I loved the environment. I made good friends, and I just felt I was where I was supposed to be. Interestingly enough, I had a couple of experiences during graduate school that shaped me and my art and the work that I've done. The first one was after a year being in the department, 2 of the 3 of my major instructors, 2 of them came to me separately, and each of them said, you know, Kim, why don't you transfer into the painting department? And of course it did, it made some sense, because I'll tell you in a minute what I was doing that made them think, well, why is she in our department? But I was horrified and didn't like the suggestion at all. And being the contrarian that I am, I said, absolutely not. I'm going to stay in the ceramics department. Now, to give them a little understanding, I was creating out of clay shapes, almost like structures, and then using my glazes to paint on them. Then, to make matters worse, I didn't want to fire them because I liked the look of the raw glaze. So it's sort of understandable that they might come to me and say, "Oh, hey, you're painting," but nonetheless, I felt they should have indulged me with what I wanted to do, and finally they did. And I started to fire a few things too. The second thing that happened to me in graduate school that was memorable was I was in the ceramic sculpture department. We had to take other sculpture classes, and I took a metal class, welding class. And for my final for this particular class, I welded up a big triangle, with and put a wheel inside. It was about 3 feet by 3 feet, very Duchampian looking. And then I got a piece of wood that was about 4 by 4 by about 5 feet, maybe something like that. And I took this tall, thin thing and screwed it onto the top of the triangle and the triangular pyramid. And then I took some material. I got sheets and other kinds of material, and I wrapped it around this thing and wrapped it. And I was just having a ball, an absolute ball. And I wrapped it, and then I had my my critique. And my professor, Mel Henderson, took me first and saw this thing that I was presenting, and you could sort of see him getting madder and madder, and finally he walked over to my piece and he unwrapped it, and he ran over someplace else in the sculpture yard, and he grabbed some chains, and he came over and he put the chains all around it and put it in and out of the wheel and around this thing. And he says, "Now that's what you should have done." And I was so horrified that I was unable to speak. I was unable to defend myself, and sort of, gathered up my things at the end of the critique and went home, and was horrified. But the result of this experience was that I remained interested in metal, and interested in metal combined with wrapping of something of a softer or a very opposite sort of texture. And that has stuck with me, and now so many years later, I'm working. Although when I got out of graduate school, I began to paint and paint. I've painted for 35, 40 years. But more recently, I've begun to do some mixing of my paints with some metal shapes.
Huh.
And so now, and I understand that my need to work with the metal was also combined with my need to do something that I call draping, and perhaps my painting now was my draping then. So that I have some appreciation for the various things that happened to me in graduate school.
Great. Wow. Quite the saga.
So a real story, yes.
Yeah. So tell me, Kim, what is important to you about your work these days?
You know, I think these days are ultimately the same. It's just sort of been the same thing. I keep thinking I'm digging in the same hole over and over and over and over, even though the work can change its look. I keep digging in the same hole, and what I'm digging for is to learn something about myself, to understand how I'm informed by the world and how I relate to it. That I think that's the most important thing for me, is that I learn from my work. That I learn something from my work. People that have influenced me, artists that influenced me. One of the very first artists, that the piece of artwork that just knocked me over was a standing man, metal piece, almost life size, by Ellie Nadelman, and he stands there with kind of leaning on a pole. And I remember seeing that when I was back in Lincoln, Nebraska, at the museum there, the Sheldon Art Museum. I don't know if it was called the Sheldon Art Museum at the time, but I think University Art Museum. And it just struck me on all levels, But after, now the artist that I would name would be Pat Steer. Was a wonderful. I have followed her career. And I was deeply, deeply influenced by her work before the rain pieces that she makes, which I think are just quite lovely and wonderful also. But her early work really excited me. Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, and definitely the abstract expressionists, particularly de Kooning, Joan Mitchell, for sure. And then I always have to speak of Jay DeFeo and her glorious drawings have always stayed with me.
That's wonderful. It's great to talk to you and learn more about your work. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
It was a pleasure. Bye now.